there were no FDA-approved injections available for service members. And so there's a statutory law that comes along with that, in the fact that service members must be given the option to accept or refuse. So I was communicating that up my chain of command, and then largely for the unvaccinated service members, we'll call them, they began to weaponize the testing protocols against the service members who had religious convictions, such as myself. So basically what they did was, all the service members who were quote unquote unvaccinated, in order to obtain access to their place of duty, they would have to participate with the emergency use authorized testing kits to show a negative result before they could go perform their duties. Highly discriminatory and highly unlawful, given the fact that even the testing kits weren't FDA approved, and by federal statute, a service member, again, must be given the option to accept or refuse
so
those
since
products.
you refused the vaccine and you didn't get the testing, I guess, right?
Right.
So what happened?
So then I was communicating this protected communication up my chain of command. There was a staff judge advocate by the name of Colonel Yevgeny Vindman, who then decided to press charges against me, bring it forth to a court-martial.
Yevgeny Vindman?
Yevgeny Vindman.
Vindman is very familiar for some reason.
Yeah, so that's the twin brother of Alexander Vindman, the colonel. Apparently they were both...
who drove the impeachment of the former president.
That's correct. So after they got removed from the White House, he went to Aberdeen Proving Grounds to be the staff judge advocate for my commanding general. So he was the one that recommended to the commanding general to bring me to a court-martial for, after communicating these protected communications through the chain of command, to perform a redress with my commanding general. Instead, they brought me to a court-martial and convicted me, but the judge ended up giving me no punishment. However, the judge even further recommended the commanding general to drop everything, because I am a protected communicator. Unfortunately, the commanding general decided to use the conviction as means for elimination of my service after 17 years of active duty.
So you said you're a protected communicator. Why is that?
So per the Army regulation, anytime you bring up violations of regulation, federal law, and specific dangers and substantial dangers to public health and safety, that's protected communication, and they have a duty to push that further, in which I did. I was bringing up, as a medical officer, I was bringing up the vaccine adverse reaction database from VAERS, the CDC database, that showed the enormous spike with these experimental injections, COVID-19 injections, and the fact that you cannot force a service member to participate with these products, whether it's a emergency use authorized mask, test, or injection, or even in some of these hospitals, the ventilators. We have to remind ourselves the ventilators in the hospitals were also emergency use authorized products. And with that, specifically for the masking, testing, and injections, service members have the option, must be given the option to accept or refuse, because if you force...
They must be given the option to accept or refuse.
That's exactly...
How does that it seems like that would contravene directly this vaccine mandate, though. It seems like those two rights, those two orders are in direct opposition.
They're unlawful. It's an unlawful order to force and coerce service members to participate with these experimental products. That's why this was written into legislation back in 2004, I believe, that a service member must be given the option to accept or refuse these products. And that largely
Why was that ignored then? Particularly in your case?
That's a good question. I mean, we can go back and look at the transcript and look at the judge's lawfulness determination, and he clearly misrepresented that statute.
Tell me more about this provision, this part of the military code, which would have allowed service members to refuse the vaccine, which apparently was ignored. Tell me.
Yeah, so it's federal statute, United States Code 10-1107 Alpha, which specifically says a service member must be given the option to accept or refuse, because these are experimental emergency use authorized products. They must be given the option to accept or refuse. However, we had had an individual within the Defense Department, her name was Terry Adderam, who published a highly illegal memo, in my opinion, that stated that...
Where does she work in the Defense Department?
She was the...
was she a lawyer? It sounds like she was
She was a medical advisor, so one of the assistant defense medical advisors, and I could have just, you know, her specific,
And she wrote a memo, the gist of which was?
That the FDA approved and licensed product was interchangeable with the emergency use authorized product, which is wholly inaccurate. You can't have an FDA approved and licensed product interchangeable with an emergency use authorized product. And furthermore, the FDA own information said that those products were legally distinct.
So this memo apparently subverted the provision you're talking about somehow. Is that?
Yes, that's correct, because a lot of service members, when they brought the communication up to their chain of command that the local military treatment facility did not have the FDA approved and licensed product, a lot of the commanders threw that memo in their face and said, no, right here, look, it's interchangeable. Right, so they had that as kind of a weaponization, regulatory arm, if you will, to coerce service members even more. And so whether it was at the local clinics that were giving out the shots or the commanders in general. But another important point to make is commanders, specifically in the Army under FRAGO 5, which is a fragmentary order,
FRAGO 5.
FRAGO 5 in the Army specifically said commanders must ensure that the local military treatment facility has the FDA approved and licensed products, in which they did not because they didn't exist. And then we went on to what we know now as individuals like myself and the tens of thousands of others get unlawfully discharged, many of them with general discharge, which is a characterization that has impacts on...
Which is what you got apparently, right?
Right, I got
a general discharge as opposed to an honorable discharge.
As opposed to an honorable, which has implications for employment benefits, employment rights. On your DD-214, it said unacceptable conduct. So if an employer asks for your DD-214, and many of them do, they look at that and they see unacceptable conduct, and it's a stigma attached for many of these tens of thousands of service members.
A very complex story, certainly a story which has involved you exerting tremendous amount of courage at this point. Sir, thank you very much for sharing your story with us
Thanks for having
on
me.
Weekly Briefing.
God bless.